Hello, my name is Tina Jordan, and I am the Vice President of Membership for AFCEA International. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the first in our 2020 series of panels titled Women in Cyber Leadership. We will hold additional Women in Cyber Leadership panels at TechNet Augusta and TechNet Indo-Pacific next year. Today's panel is brought to you by Women in AFCEA, and it is sponsored by Sienna and Walker and Associates. Sienna and Walker and Associates are huge supporters of Women in AFCEA and sponsor all of our women's panels held at our major AFCEA events. Thank you, Sienna and Walker and Associates. We are grateful for your support. Now a few administrative comments. As part of AFCEA's support of continuing education, this session has been approved to earn one GIAC CPE. The panel session is pre-recorded and the discussion will last for 1 hour. You may ask questions in the attendee chat window during the session. Admiral Hamby and the panelists are online viewing today's session and will answer your questions via the chat window. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Admiral Jan Hamby, United States Navy retired. Admiral Hamby leads Fairwinds Consulting, LLC, providing project-based consulting and speaking services in the area of cyberspace, education, leadership, and diversity. Previously, Admiral Hamby served as a Chancellor of the College of Information and Cyberspace at the National Defense University. As a flag officer, Admiral Hamby directed the global operations of the Navy's offensive and defensive cyber forces, served as the director of the North American Aerospace Defense U.S. Northern Command's telecommunications and computer networking efforts, served as a vice director of C3 Systems on the Joint Staff and was Deputy Chief Information Officer for the Department of Defense's operational telecommunications and computer networks and cyber technology infrastructure. Admiral Hamby assists the running of Fairwinds Farm, her family's sheep, alpaca, and lavender farm in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. She is an active knitwear designer and a member of the fiber arts community. So with that, thank you again to our sponsor, Sienna and Walker and Associates, and Admiral Hamby, welcome, and over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Tina. It is really a pleasure to be with this group today. It's frankly always good to engage with AFCEA, and it's even better when I can do so in a forum that is getting at some of what I feel are the truly key challenges that we face in the area of cybersecurity today. During my active duty and federal careers, it became very clear to me that the workforce is the very linchpin of our success in achieving a manageable level of risk in our cybersecurity programs. And by workforce, I mean both the dedicated professionals who focus on the sourcing, implementing, and operating of the tools and technology that help deliver our ability to maneuver in cyberspace, and all of the workforce that relies upon cyberspace to accomplish their jobs, even if that is merely sending emails. When I think about the latter workforce, I think about some of the assessments that have been going on for a number of years and go back a number of years that consistently report that in the neighborhood of 80% or more of all cybersecurity incidents are caused by human error on the part of a normal user. If you add in spills of personally identifiable information, PII, some assessments bump that figure up as high as 97%. Our general workforce's level of understanding of how they play into our cybersecurity simply can't be understated. And with regard to the specific workforce that is charged with addressing the challenges presented by our user population, along with all those challenges that emanate from more nefarious quarters, that workforce really deserves our special attention. It is under tremendous stress. Leaders expect it to perform miracles on a daily basis. And for some reason, they seem to think that this workforce can deliver perfect security. Of course, all of those of us in the business know that that is not possible. We also see that attackers and the technologies that they're using to attack us are growing more and more sophisticated as we go through time. We also see that the demand for these kinds of personnel is surging. More and more governments, more and more organizations, more and more companies and businesses are all competing for the same small pool of qualified candidates that are so essential to this work. We are in great need of concerted efforts to grow the numbers of people, especially women, who are interested in careers in cybersecurity. There's an untapped population out there of women and people who have never had this opportunity even presented to them as something they might be able to do that we need to tap. We need to get into that workforce and pull it in and use it for our needs. We need to support them so that they can be more effective in their work. We need to support the information technology professionals by providing better policies, better practices and tools, and better user behavior. If we can do this collectively, then we can make some progress here. And that is what today's panel is all about. I anticipate that you all will agree with me that we have brought together an excellent team to address this issue. Collectively, they can help us dig in and come up with ideas to face this challenge, whether we are in government, academia, or in the private sector. So let me introduce them to you. We have with us today Ms. Tanisha McMillan. Ms. McMillan is the Division Chief of the Cyber Situational Awareness and NetOps Division at the Defense Information Systems Agency, DISA. I'm sure you all realize the scope of responsibility for her is enormous, given DISA's role in providing the telecommunications and networking capacity of our entire DoD. Ms. McMillan leads civilian DoD employees, active duty service members, and defense contractors. And she focuses on cybersecurity, certainly, but she also focuses on ensuring that the flow of information to those who need it is not impeded by those cybersecurity efforts. There's a balancing act that she executes, and she does it quite well. Her workforce is critical to meeting the needs of our warfighters and our allies, and she personally has made huge contributions to their success. We also have joining us Dr. Diane Murphy. Dr. Murphy is the director of the School of Technology and Innovation at Marymount University, and she brings a broad perspective to the table. She has performed in her past in the roles of government contractor. She is what anyone would call a serial entrepreneur with multiple business successes in her past. And now she's a college professor. Plus, she comes to us from Europe. She was born on the island of Guernsey in the English Channel, and she was educated and worked throughout Europe before coming to the United States. And that kind of diversity of thought is incredibly valuable to the work that we are attempting to do here. Of late, she has been very invested in working on building the number of women in the cybersecurity workforce through a range of novel initiatives that I'll give her a chance to share in a little bit. Joining us from industry is Ms. Sheree Stokes. Sheree is the president of Title IT Solutions, and her path to leadership of Title IT gave her a vantage point to be able to consider the implications of cybersecurity in many different settings. She started as an Air Force acquisition officer, and she built up her own expertise in program management of very large-scale IT projects as a member of the private sector in support of the government. Today, she is actively engaged in a host of efforts targeted at developing people, especially women, for careers in science in general and cybersecurity specifically. Her efforts have been recognized at every level, and she's making an impact right at the beginning of the cybersecurity workforce development chain. She's doing so by serving on the governor of Alabama's STEM Advisory Council and the Alabama Innovation Commission, and she also founded a Montgomery-based nonprofit that educates girls and minority children and makes them aware of opportunities for their futures in STEM and cyber. We also bring the active duty to the table. Our active duty cybersecurity workforce is well represented by Colonel Lauren Corshane, the commander of the 67th Cyberspace Operations Group. She leads airmen operating in and through cyberspace to deliver cyber effects for our combatant commanders. She has deep experience defending and operating the network at deployed locations, as well as in garrison, and she has paid her dues in staff work at all levels of command. I'm particularly intrigued by how her experience as Chief of the Special Projects and Innovation Division in the Directorate for Global Operations of the Joint Staff will inform our discussion today. So that is our panel, and I know you all recognize what a powerful panel it is. I'm going to come back around to Ms. McMillan, and Tanisha, I'm going to ask if you could share with us a bit more about how you got to where you are, and how has your experience in DISA affected your view of the health of our cybersecurity workforce?
Absolutely, Admiral, and thank you again for the introduction. So I actually got involved in cybersecurity with a computer science degree from St. John's University in Queens, New York. And after education there, I decided to try to figure out what I was going to do with this degree. And I started coding for a company in the city, and realized that I wasn't quite sure how to take those honed skill sets that I learned in school, and wanted to do something a little bit different than sitting in a lab, right? And so I was introduced by a colleague of mine to an FBI agent that was in cybersecurity and was working for the bureau at the time, and was really just exposing me to different opportunities that the federal government had to offer with someone with my degree. And so I decided I wanted to go back to get my master's degree in cybersecurity, and started working for DISA in 2005. And I had the opportunity to kind of get exposures to different parts of the department through special liaison activities and special deployments through DoD CIO, over at NSA and other organizations. And it really helped hone the experiences that I had in different parts of the department, that showed me the policy that's extremely critical in enabling a lot of the things that we want to put in place across the department and ensuring cybersecurity defense. And then also too, in my current role as a division chief and previous leadership opportunities as a branch chief, I really got exposure to what critical impact there is in the event that we do not take an emphasis on cybersecurity. So in my unique role now, I have the fun pleasure of working with a lot of defensive cyber operators that on a day-to-day basis are trying to figure out how to navigate being proactive and less reactionary to events and activities that consistently hit the DoD or the DoD infrastructure network. And so through that, it's kind of informed, I think, the exposure to the importance of it, one, but also secondly, how to take a different strategic approach in really just deploying tools and capabilities and not just throwing the next vendor solution right at our analysts, to really help them do their jobs and enable them to do their jobs more effectively. It's through the opportunities that I have in my division and kind of leading that strategy and implementation that I get to see the results of analysts able to leverage a lot of analytics and capabilities that my office puts into place.
Thank you for that. That is going to feed into our future conversation in this hour for sure. But for now, I'm going to jump over to academia and ask you, Dr. Murphy, Diane, I am really intrigued to hear more of your story and how your different roles have shaped the perspective that you now have from an academic chair about the challenges that our cybersecurity workforce faces, as well as a little bit about some of those initiatives you're involved in to bring more women and minorities into the cybersecurity profession.
Thank you. Just a few things. I started out before there was cybersecurity. So, as many of us have. It's sort of interesting to me when I talk to people about their journey into cybersecurity. Everybody is very different. But I started out in the pharmaceutical industry using computers to design drugs. And at that time, data security was the big thing. Okay. And so I worked very extensively on data security. I then came to the United States and I started working as a government contractor and on a wide variety of artificial intelligence work. So I have a background from early in the 80s on artificial intelligence, which of course is coming back today and presenting us with new threats in the industry. So it's sort of interesting to sort of reflect back on how we used to do it to how easy it is today to generate AI projects and also the cybersecurity risks associated with them. I became an academic about 20 years ago when my kids went to college. I was educated in the UK and had no idea what American education was about. So when my kids went to college, I went to college too and became a professor. And over the years, I've seen a tremendous growth in cybersecurity education. Primarily, initially, we were looking at purely network security, which is where many of the males are still focused on being a penetration tester. However, over the years, cybersecurity has broadened tremendously, and a lot now, I think we brought up in terms of human error. The human side is very important. The policy side is very important. And so the programs that we do now are so much broader, and not just at the undergraduate level. We're doing more and more at the master's level, but also at the doctoral level, where we're trying to create leaders who have a cybersecurity focus so that we can stop just doing the defensive work we're doing and maybe coming up with some more strategic ways of making all of this work. I've been very interested in women in cybersecurity. For many years, I've done several research grants with the National Science Foundation about how we can attract girls at high school level into cybersecurity. I've run many of the Gen Cyber camps that NSA promoted, always trying to get a 50-50 split between males and females. And we found that the females in general, are very good once they understand what cybersecurity is about. Many, I think, were initially put off by this sort of militaristic approach. Okay, but once we broadened it and said, why don't you come and protect a healthcare system? Okay, again, healthcare is one of the big vulnerabilities today. Just broadening it to things that females are more likely to understand. We found a very, very good response. And right now, our master's programs are 50% female. So we're very pleased with the progress that we're making, particularly women in general. The surveys in the workforce show that women are more highly educated than males in the cybersecurity workforce, and they are taking on more leadership positions. And I think that's really exciting.
That's fascinating. And I think our panel kind of reflects that, the fact that there are more women involved in leadership roles. And the notion that the diversity of thought that women bring to the game is incredibly valuable too, which leads me to Miss Stokes. Sheree, I am really curious to understand how someone whose undergraduate work was really focused on ceramics engineering, how did you shift to bring those engineering skills into the cybersecurity challenge? And I'm wondering if, as you tell us a little bit of how you made the leap from ceramics engineering into cyber, if you might also comment on the potential that the private sector has to help address today's topic of the cybersecurity workforce.
Sure. So I will say going into college and looking at engineering, as so many people do, that first class that gives you that introduction of, so this is what all engineers do. These are the different types. What's fun? What sounds traditional? I had that opportunity to say, so what was the most creative one that I felt like I wouldn't enjoy just as a freshman in college, but something I would enjoy for years to come? Um, I also had that opportunity to still bring home those little projects to my parents, like you did when you were in elementary and middle school. So I was still bringing home ceramic mugs and new spark plugs and glass. And it was just something that was not only interesting, but it was challenging. And it was about the problem solving. So, as many people do, as an engineer, I commissioned as a lieutenant in the Air Force, and I went into acquisitions from an IT perspective. And serving my time as an IT acquisition officer also opened doors to look at all aspects of information technology. And on the acquisition side, again, it's the problem solving. And so doing the problem solving there was truly a natural fit into going to what you do for cybersecurity. While cybersecurity is such a growing and evolving field, what it does is it gives you the chance to say, so what's existing today and what do I need to learn about to protect myself for tomorrow? And that's something that carries on and it truly evolves. So it evolved from what I did in it's fun, it's creative ceramic aspect to what you do in figuring out that correct acquisition to getting the right contractor that you might have or picking the right product that you need. And now from a cybersecurity perspective, it's again looking at those products, looking at those problems and the challenges that surround you to be able to say, how do I down select? How do I solve that problem? Now, am I looking at a more creative way to do something that's now protecting not only valuable assets, but oftentimes it's also protecting valuable information. So it's the problem solving aspect of it that allowed me to carry through from my undergraduate education into what I was doing on a full time basis. But again, when you look at industry, industry has been able to really put a lot of dollars into the research and development end of cybersecurity. That's very important where your traditional federal and or state agencies may not have the bandwidth to support those R&D efforts. Industry does have that. And not only do they have that, they also have the means sometimes to work on the educational aspects of that, such that those continuing education opportunities are now existing. And from an organic standpoint on the military and service agency side, now they can supplement that workforce with individuals that have taken those courses and or have explored those additional opportunities. So that again feeds right into that diversity of thought. And now when you're actually constructing that table that's solving those problems, you have individuals that are knee deep in it, but you also have those that have a general understanding of how it affects so much outside of just their one single piece of environment. So it's that problem solving and it's that opportunity to bring a number of individuals to the table to maybe solve a common problem or sometimes even a very unique one.
Thank you for that. I would also offer that it's that bringing different dimensions of personality to the table to make that problem solving even stronger. And that is my perfect segue over to Colonel Corshane. Lauren, like our other panelists, you really are a superb example of how cyber professionals aren't single dimension people. You have crossed domains as our other panelists throughout your career, and today you still play many different roles. I will mention that your story resonates with me quite deeply because I was also a mother while serving on active duty, and I was also married to another service member who is not serving in my same branch of service. So your story really sounds a lot like mine. I know it takes a lot of determination, and it really is a tremendous accomplishment that speaks to your dedication both to duty and to family. And I also know that that experience heightens the sense of urgency that you might feel about what it is that you do on a day to day basis in your profession. Can you tell us a little bit more about your path to your current position and how all of these different experiences have affected your view of where we may be heading on the issue of the health of the cybersecurity workforce?
Yes, ma'am. And thank you for the opportunity to sit on such a prestigious panel of women. This is such a phenomenal opportunity. I'll be interested to hear more about your story, maybe in a different forum, because it's definitely it has built me into the person that I'm today. I look at problems differently now as a commander, as a mother, as a wife, and many of you talked about the different perspectives that having a diverse workforce brings to the problem set. So having started early in my career focusing on the security of airfield systems and then working into the DOD and operations side, and then defense of the networks, building some of our secure networks earlier in my career, now to looking at the problem from an offensive-minded perspective, I think that having a diverse focus and having diverse background has really led me to be effective in my current position. So when I, looking at the problem set from an offensive perspective and how do I maintain the lethality of our joint force, I took the opportunity to reach out to some of the other phenomenal airmen and women within the 16th Air Force Enterprise. And I was speaking with one of the directors of operations of our Defensive Cyber Operations Squadron, Major Candace Urrutia, who's also another phenomenal woman and IT expert that I think you'll see rise to the ranks within the Air Force in a very short order. We started talking about IP theft. And I think this is an area where the Department of Defense, as the sector-specific agency for the DIB, has a very important role on focusing on the malign influence of our adversaries and how they're utilizing and stealing our IP to support their operations and then attempting to diminish the national security of our nation through our defense industrial base. And so that's been one of the focus areas. And you had chatted about my time in the Deputy Directorate for Global Operations, also known as the J39. And I had a phenomenal opportunity to work with Major General Tom Murphy on standing up the Protecting Critical Technology Task Force. And I found that to be one of the most exciting opportunities because we really were focusing on bridging the gap between our commercial partners that we depend so highly on, and how we can ensure that those systems are secure as we use them to protect and defend our nation. And so looking at how we change processes. And I remember that the secretary had given him an edict to be bold, don't align to the status quo, smartly and decisively change how we do business so that we can maintain a level of cybersecurity that, again, goes back to that lethality that the department must bring to our national security. And so as I looked at building out the Protecting Critical Technology Task Force, and then that drove into the 2018 elections, and how do we take an innovative approach to securing the democracy of our nation. And when I look back, there were so many very intelligent, strong women that were behind that effort to ensure that we had free and fair elections in 2018. And so I think some of the points that were made by the panelists earlier, having that diversity in thought and focusing on the problem set in a different way, I think has really provided us with some successful vignettes over the last few years about how improving our cybersecurity can't just be a mission that we do every once in a while when we need to focus on a special project, but it has to be something that we do every day, just like putting our seatbelt on when we get in the car and take a trip. And so I think through panels like this and the focus between partnerships between commercial industry, the Department of Defense, some of the other whole of government agencies, as well as our international partners, we can get to a point where the standards are in place and can help to protect our critical infrastructure, looking at it from a national security perspective, but also for our commercial partners from an IP theft perspective. So I think there's such huge opportunities, and I'm excited to be a part of it. I'm excited that I've been put in a position of leadership. Well, now I can influence the airmen that are coming behind me because we have some brilliant and innovative thinkers. And so it's now incumbent on people like myself to figure out how we unleash that innovative thought and excitement, and then looking up and out, how do we influence the policymakers so that we can connect both of those dots to really drive the innovation that we need in this domain?
That is a fantastic perspective, that we need to be leading not just those who follow us, but those who we follow. I really love that piece, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. As we look at today's topic, clearly at the core of it is the capability of our people and their education, but it's driven by the threats themselves. So before we dig in much further on the workforce pieces, I'd like to ask you all as a group what you think about the threats themselves. Colonel, you mentioned the threat of intellectual property. There are a lot of other threats out there. And for instance, insider threat, that might be a good one to jump on first. And I don't necessarily mean the folks who are malicious users. I'm talking about the general user. And in that general user base, we've seen so many problems generated by people who either don't understand their role as stewards of the network or who are just unwilling to buckle that seatbelt when they get in the car. So, Tanisha, I'm going to ask you to kick off this piece of the conversation because this was a question that Ronnie Hawkins and I struggled with quite a lot while I was serving on the Joint Staff and then as Deputy DoD CIO. It was hard for us to have the time to think about the general user base and how it plays into this threat vector. And I was wondering if you might comment on whether or not you have time to address it and what kinds of things you think would help us with regard to shoring up that aspect of our security.
No, absolutely. And what was actually going through my mind when you asked that question is also a little bit of the complexity of the environment we're in right now, right? And with COVID-19. And so one of the things that initially came to mind was how the Department of Defense kind of took I think, a very leaning forward approach in enhancing how we do our cybersecurity training, right? So you mentioned insider threats and just the common user that's on the network. A lot of folks don't truly understand the implications of just clicking on a link just because you got an email, right? And how that can open up a complete hole in your environments and your networks. And I think across, I'm sure within industry and certainly within federal government, we had to really just, I think, take an approach proactively in how we better arm our employees and our staff members with cybersecurity training. Right. And I don't mean that necessarily, click and get a certification to say you did it. Right. And so I really liked how Mr. Deasy really enforced that and took a leadership role across the department to say, hey, we are going to ensure that all of the employees that are on our networks are taking the requisite classes that are needed to at least understand what does it mean to defend the DoDN? What does it mean to ensure that you're being vigilant when you're on the networks? What does it mean to ensure that if you think that you've been exposed or hacked in any type of way, that you are informing the respective parties so that that perpetual problem would persist, right? And so where I really liked the department in the beginning of COVID with trying to handle, I think, this collaboration environment we were in, right? We're all going remote now that we're dealing with this pandemic. And so taking the extra precautions, even when you're at home and, understanding that you can't just have your 5-year-old play with your laptop, right? And the vulnerabilities that are really open because now you're having folks that are not in the workplace, but they're also at home and they're navigating this new environment that you're in. And so looking at how you do from an analytic perspective in monitoring the networks, I know that my particular agency was very pivotal in arming our DCO analysts, our defensive cyber operators, with analytics to monitor those types of things. One of the things also that we looked at particularly was the technologies, such as SIM technologies or SOAR technologies that we could leverage in order to, I think, proactively engage and not be so reactionary. One of the things that we were starting to see over the course of time, especially within the pandemic that we're in, is the increasing amount of cyber attacks that were happening in the background. And that obviously wasn't at the forefront of the conversation within media, but certainly was a reality that I'm sure all of you all can have had witnessed or an experience with. And so I think broadening our perimeter defense, broadening our understanding of our endpoint and how we're getting various sensory information to protect our networks, I think was very critical. And I think we certainly were trying to reshape and rehome from a strategic perspective what technologies we were leveraging to monitor that activity. But in encapsulating, I think the initial question, because I kind of went off there on a tangent, is certainly within, I think, just taking a higher emphasis in training your workforce. If you do not train your workforce on what it really means to defend your networks and ensure that you're taking precautions to have better awareness, you will always leave a gaping hole, I think, within an organization.
While I was at National Defense University as chancellor at the College of Information and Cyberspace, one of the themes that we frequently hammered on was that employing network capabilities presented both a huge opportunity and a huge risk. And trying to get that across to every single user of the network was something that was could be a bit of a challenge. Dr. Murphy, Diane, as you are working in academia, you may be closer to some of the younger people who are coming up through the ranks today, as it were. What kind of attitudes are you seeing? And leveraging on that answer, are you seeing a willingness or a curiosity to employ some of the machine learning and artificial intelligence kinds of tools to help us get ahead of the problem and to help the general user not have to be so responsible? I hope that made sense.
Good. A couple of things, really. The first thing I think that we need to identify that the younger people have a totally different approach to privacy. You know, they're so used to posting everything on social media, not really realizing the consequences from a security perspective. And so I find it very interesting to see how privacy and the loopholes that it produces is very prevalent in younger people. They are excited about technology, period, and there are so many changes in technology. So we are now finding people not just wanting to study cybersecurity, but also to combine it with data science so that they can look at the data. And we all know we have so much data, we have so much alert fatigue out there caused by the number of incidents that are happening. And so we're seeing a lot of interest now in how you use artificial intelligence, how you use machine learning to be able to do a better job at identifying and predicting mainly what's going to happen. Because as we all know, most of what we do now is very reactive, okay? We wait for something to happen and then we work on it. So this whole predictive analytics, I think, is an exciting new field for many people to get into. And we have so much data out there in cybersecurity. I just wish there was more sharing of some of that data. You know, you can get all these threat reports, but they all have different results because they're using different domains. And so, but the whole idea that we have to get away from somebody sitting there watching messages go across the screen, looking for alerts, has got to go away. And so, again, a lot of interesting work going on, but also artificial intelligence is also producing new threats, okay? Because now, you know, the technology is different. You now have things such as data poisoning where people can modify a machine learning algorithm as it goes. So, it's like all of these things. There's pros and there's cons, and so we're trying to make people aware of the issues with machine learning as well as the benefits in cybersecurity.
So once again, the opportunities and the risks. And that really kind of gets at the heart of why our general user population needs to have some comprehension of this. Now, we've hit on a couple of vectors of threat here. Another vector of threat that could help get the attention of our general user population as individuals is that of the criminal threat. And I know that private sector is far more invested in looking at these kinds of challenges. Ms. Stokes, Sheree, I was wondering if you might comment on some of the things like ransomware or cloud jacking and some of those areas that I don't recall thinking about those so much when I was in DoD, but I know you must think about them quite a lot.
We do. While you don't see it as much in DoD, you certainly see it on the state and local side, as well as within private industry. So you have a number of cities, counties, entire states where essentially their information is being held hostage and they feel as though they have to pay the ransom. And it's a matter of now you don't want that great significant event to happen to make you change the way you're doing business and to also encourage you to be more protective of your data and to really consider cybersecurity. So while ransomware is seen on that side of the house, it's also been seen even greater within your smaller industries. Just as Ms. McMillan talked about, so much that has happened because of COVID-19. You have an increase in virtual infrastructure as well as virtual operations. You have a number of companies that didn't traditionally have an IT component. And now, because they need to stay in business, they have to look at technology. They now have to have an app that goes with their business because before it wasn't necessary. It was a nicety. Now it's a necessity. So when you're starting to do business in an area that you may not have been accustomed to, you're opening yourself up to, of course, one, additional opportunities, but also additional risk, just like we spoke about with AI or machine learning. So now that you're in that realm, sure, you are almost a prime candidate for dealing with ransomware issues and cloud jacking because it makes sense to you to have your data in the cloud because that's what everyone is doing right now. But unless you truly understand the implications of that, as well as the risk, it makes it a little bit harder for you, especially if it's not your background, to know where do you have to place that emphasis? Where do you have to place that priority? And so, of course, you have different individuals that can come in and completely walk you through that process, but then you also have probably the same amount of bad actors that are out there. And so they're looking for candidates. They're looking for companies like that have those voids, that aren't as intelligent in those areas. So there's a lot of information that can, one, help you with that as a small business, as a business that's looking to do a digital transformation of sorts. And I think that's where you will see that within DoD, whereas before, traditionally, it may not have been as much of a concern. Or you may have said, hey, we don't deal with ransomware. Hey, we're okay on cloud jacking because we know that someone else owns our cloud and that's their problem. They're worried about that. But at this point, now you have to look and see, so what about the other implications? What about the other aspects of the business of what we do and how we're looking to transform our entire operation, what we're looking to do from a digital transformation standpoint, how we're actually encompassing digital services into what you do. And that's be it on your weapon system side, or on your business enterprise system side. It affects actually all aspects of that. So now, are you a right candidate for something like that? How are you preparing yourself? And I think that goes to what we spoke about, just be it on offensive cyber operations as well as defensive cyber operations. You have to look at both aspects of that and now take yourself out of that candidate column. How do you protect your data? How do you ensure that from a leadership perspective, but then an overall coverage perspective, that you are protecting everything that you can?
I would love to hear what Colonel Corshane has to say about this.
Gosh, there's so many great topics to talk about. Um, I think that it boils down to a couple of points. From a DoD perspective, we have to make it's no longer an assumption that the United States is infiltrated by our adversaries. Just because you can't see them does not mean that they're there. And so I think oftentimes our mindset is one of our networks are clean and we're going to protect them. And we can put up a wall, we can make it tall, we can make it thick, but I don't think that you can make that assumption any longer. And so from a DoD perspective, we have to be able to, one, partner with industry, but we also have to work from a no huddle offensive perspective. So I have to be able to take the information that I'm garnering from much of that commercially available threat data, commercially available or procured information, marry that with publicly available information, and then match that up against the intelligence apparatus to then determine how can I push my adversary back? How can I get them back into gray space or red space, and then be able to protect and make some tough decisions about the systems that we're going to prioritize, because they're the linchpin systems or those critical technologies that if those technologies are the ones that our adversaries can then infiltrate and exfiltrate key information, that's going to cause a problem from both a national security perspective, but also from an economic perspective within the United States. I think COVID has given us some real opportunities to capitalize on. Like we talked about earlier, the DoD was able to really ramp up much of the IT technology to support our teleworking. However, with that came some risks, and we saw hacking of the CBR Teams site. But had we been ready for those types of events to happen, we know that they're going to happen. We could have take some proactive defensive measures. We could have put a DMZ around some of those key systems had we prioritized them early, given the situation, and maybe seeded that DMZ with some valuable information that we could then, from a no huddle offense perspective, figure out how to capitalize on that opportunity and impact our adversaries. Now putting my offensive cyber hat on. I think it's also an opportunity to capitalize on information. So if we can not only take the information, use it from a machine learning and an AI perspective, our information and our adversaries' information, we can be successful. But we'll only be successful if we're teaching the tradecraft to utilize that information properly. Oftentimes, I think we rely on a contractor, at least from a DoD perspective, we rely on a contractor to provide information, but we haven't trained our airmen in the tradecraft to then analyze that information correctly. Or we pay a contractor to analyze the information, but we can only query it for one requirement, and then oftentimes maybe we wanted to pivot and move in a different direction. And so from an agility perspective, I think where COVID has helped us is to figure out ways that we can be more agile, and that we have to take a proactive prioritization stance. And we're going to have to make tough decisions from a cybersecurity perspective in the future.
I see lots of head nods from the rest of the panelists. You've really struck a chord there. And I think collectively, our discussion of the last few minutes has really heightened for everyone the sense of urgency with regard to the fact that all these threats are out there. So tools and policy are part of the answer, but the workforce itself is a key component. And one of my biggest concerns is that there are not enough of these kinds of people out there or coming up the pipeline. Dr. Murphy, could you comment on what you've seen in terms of the ability to recruit people, particularly women, into this field, and how we can look at trying to help retain them so they can help make some of these smart prioritization decisions, bringing their full perspective into the discussion? I'd really appreciate that.
Yeah, there's been an emphasis on recruiting young people into the profession, but really and truly that's a long shot, right? If we're going to make any difference now, we have to look at career changes, people who have IT experience, knowledge of the technology, and having them move into cybersecurity. So that's one of our focuses now is not just the undergraduate, but as Tanisha said, how do you go from where you were undergraduate wise into cybersecurity? So we're seeing a lot of people now in the particularly females in their late 20s and 30s looking for careers in the management aspect of cybersecurity. Not necessarily as a penetration tester, but there are so many things now where it's compliance, whether it's policy, whether it's cyber threat intelligence. All of those aspects are really interesting to the female who are traditionally, as somebody talked about, problem solvers. And so, how do we get problem solvers into the cybersecurity space? Obviously, you have to have a little bit of technical knowledge, but it's also a matter of trying to get people to understand that cybersecurity is something that everybody can do, and that women in particular have that problem solving and that thinking capability, what we need now in the leadership in cybersecurity. I think there's a lot of people coming in, maybe just taking some training courses, some certifications, and coming in at the technician level. But I see really the demand that we've talked about today is at the higher levels and the thinking levels. So again, it is just a matter of trying to make sure people understand that this is a very creative thinking type work and not just network security.
Colonel. Colonel, I see that you have a...
If possible, I'd like to add here, I think that from a DoD perspective, I think we have seen a greater number of women in higher ranking positions. So I think that some of our younger women now see themselves in leadership positions in the cyber and cybersecurity world. And so I think that's really important. When you look at Lieutenant General O'Brien as the A26, as a woman, a leader, a mother, a husband who was a Marine, so has a dual military background as well. You look at the previous commander of the 67th Cyber Wing, who's also a phenomenal leader, a woman, a mother. There are icons, there are mentors that you can look towards, and you can see a bright future. You can see the dots connected to how you can progress from a DoD perspective, which I find to be extremely important. Unfortunately, I think COVID has been very detrimental to women in the military. Many of us wear numerous hats, and that's something to be celebrated. But it was very difficult in the first few months of COVID, and I think you had a lot of women when you pair the responsibilities, the mom guilt, and trying to do your job while your kids are at home, and that being very important to you. Many of them made decisions to depart the service, and having a now blended retirement system, it really gave them an opportunity to do that. So while the DoD has lost some very influential and talented women, I think it's definitely a bonus for the commercial industry. And I think while it might be detrimental to us, I think it is an opportunity that we need to focus on as a collective group to build partnerships in the future moving forward. So you have some defense-minded national security experts amongst your ranks that we can build towards a common solution to some of these key issues that we're talking about today.
Thank you for that. Would any of the other panelists like to weigh in?
I would. Just a couple of things that the Colonel said that I want to pull a thread on. While, yes, that certainly changed, and COVID has certainly changed the makeup of those leadership positions, and certainly the mom guilt that's seen there, because I completely understand that as a mother. I will say it has placed an increased emphasis on that diversity of that team and basically the ability to say, maybe it's not this person that I have to have here sitting in this physical seat for 8 hours a day, but it's someone that I can now bring in on a temporary basis or a remote basis or from a virtual standpoint that still brings value to the team of what we've had. And I know we've seen an increase on that on the commercial side, but at the same time, it's also shown a lot of other companies and probably your traditional types of companies and or agencies that they can recruit in that way as well. And it gives more options for them. Therefore, when we're actually doing recruiting and showing ourselves to young girls that are looking and at least seeing the options and the flexibility of what they would have to do, it now gives another option and another alternative for them. I think we've seen so many times where people say that, let's have that open window so you can see what the possibilities are. But someone once told me that it's not just an open window, it should be a mirror. And a lot of times these students and these young girls want to see themselves in that mirror. So being able to stand in front and say, yes, there's someone that looks like me, that talks like me, that's doing this type of work. Now they have a better understanding of their ability to reach those goals. So being able to expose them at an early age to what those possibilities are and the fact that the flexibility exists now, I think is huge. And I think we see that with AFCEA, different partnerships that AFCEA has and Women in AFCEA has, even if it's a member of, partnering with agencies like the Girl Scouts and other organizations that are showing the true STEM possibilities that you have. It's one more opportunity to show that flexibility, one more opportunity to show that there's diversity amongst those fields, but it's another opportunity to say, now I'm that mirror. And you have that opportunity to stand in front of young girls at that time. So I think while COVID has certainly taught us a lot, I think it's also opened several doors. And it's opened several doors from a women aspect, but it's also opened several opportunities as well, especially in cybersecurity.
So as I did my doctoral research, one of the things I discovered was that the ability for an individual or for an organization to remain resilient required the ability to reframe the situation. And by this, I mean that if something bad was happening to you or to your organization, being able to peel back and adopt a different perspective so that you could perhaps see the situation as an opportunity instead of just a challenge, paid dividends in terms of attitudinal health, emotional health, psychological health, and willingness to continue to drive on to accomplish the mission. This discussion that we've just been having, I think, is a really fantastic illustration of that concept. If we can look at the pandemic, if we can look at the challenges that we see with the workforce today as opportunity, then we are far more likely to find those solutions. We have come up to the end of our allotted time. I had hoped to get into so many other things. AFCEA, you're going to have to charter us to come back and do another panel discussion for you on the characteristics of the workforce that we want to encourage, but we're going to have to wrap things up. Sorry about that. Panelists, I would like to thank you all so much for joining today and for helping to develop those cyber professionals who are in attendance watching this webinar. Your service to all of us is appreciated, and it has been a real pleasure working with each and every one of you. Thanks to AFCEA for hosting this conversation. Thank you to all of you who are attending out there. I want you to be well and take care of each other. And with that, back to you, Tina.
Well, that was amazing. So Admiral Hamby and all of our panelists, thank you so much. We greatly appreciate your remarks and your insights today. And Admiral Hamby, we will definitely take you up on your offer to moderate another panel because this conversation, it just needs to continue. So thank you for that. And the women on the panel, we know you're really busy and we know you have big jobs, and we just appreciate you taking time out of your day to be on this panel, to share your thoughts and your insights, and to support women in AFCEA. It is so important for us to hear your perspective and to learn from your reality and your experiences. So thank you for sharing your time and yourself today with us. Admiral Hamby, thank you for bringing together these amazing women to talk today, for organizing the questions, and for keeping everything on track. So thank you for that. As a thank you to all of our panelists, Women in AFCEA has made a donation to the Women Veterans Interactive, That's an organization whose mission is to provide outreach and support services to thousands of women veterans via programs, training, and resources to combat homelessness and to equip them at all stages of their military transition. So thank you for enabling us to be able to provide that donation in your names. To Sienna and Walker and Associates, thank you for sponsoring today's panel and for your continued support to women in AFCEA. And to all of our attendees, thank you for joining us today and joining the panel. And thank you. Enjoy the rest of the week. And I'm going to close with a quote that I heard earlier this week, and that's stay positive and test negative. Thank you.